Welcome everyone. Good morning. Hope you enjoyed. Yesterday was the first day. It was kind of packed. We had many interesting talks. We will reach out to you for feedback after the end of today, and hopefully you can give us more ideas for what's coming in the future. It's another packed day today. We also have labs. We're going to have one lab here by John Papadakis from Snappy, head of QA, and we're going to have another lab in an auditorium, which is after you go out on your left and you go all straight, you probably see also the signs, which is about master building your own Gen AI with RAG, augmented retrieval, which is from John Mihailidis. The second lab, which is on the other auditorium, starts after the 1-hour coffee break. We're going to have only one QA session today after the first talk. There are no QA sessions to speed up the schedule for the rest of the talks, unfortunately, but you can always find the speakers in the booths, or you have their contact details and contact them after the conference. And we're going to have 1-hour coffee break and 1-hour lunch. We'll tell you about that in the beginning. How do we feel? Is it strong? All right, cool. Ready? Coffee, caffeine in the blood. Let's start. So today, we're kicking off with Christos Leivadiotis from Coca-Cola HBC, who's going to talk to us, welcome on stage, about NextGen Knowledge Management System powered by Agentic AI. The stage is yours. Nice to meet you. I'll give you the pointer.
Thank you. Ready to go. This is forward, this is back, okay?
Yep.
Okay, hi. Nice meeting you all. This is me. This is not an AI avatar, so this is 5 years before. Okay, I'm back. So today I will go through trying to address the bias, how we address bias, transparency, and reliability. So in developing AI applications. In general, I will try to be a little bit generic in starting the discussion, and then I'm going to share you a case study how we can proceed in developing an application with real experience. So, going through the agenda, as I told you, now we're going to go through the introduction and the importance of AI addressing bias and transparency and reliability. Then I'm going to discuss some strategies about how we can mitigate the risk of bias, how we can also have some techniques to try to identify transparency and reliability and try to resolve them, how we can ensure testing reliability, and how we can, then we'll go through the use case, the business case that we have. We have developed a system, knowledge management system, that it is having several features. Initially it started as a RAG application, but then soon we realized that this was a platform, and this is a centralized solution for the whole enterprise. So, why it is important, and why are we discussing about bias, transparency, and reliability? So, most of the companies now are changing through the AI, let's say, technology. So, technology is changing us all, and not a specific industry, all the industries. So, AI is everywhere. It's in SDLC process of every developed activity, but also in the day-to-day tasks that each corporation has. Why ethics is important, and why we're talking about ethical AI. Initially, AI was ML, trying to have some outputs. Now, with natural language processing, we are exposing those capabilities to the end user. So it is important how we can try to address issues that they may arise because the outputs are more or less unexpected. There are different, also now, let's say, different protocols and standards that are trying to mitigate those kind of risks, and we are obliged to follow several of those, let's say, standards in order to have a guideline how we can develop those applications. There are, let's say, the EU Act, but based on the location and the region of each of the corporation, there are different, let's say, guidelines that needs to be followed. Also, the last years, a lot of people didn't know about ethical AI and the concept around it. Now, 90% of the companies have faced such an incident about an ethical incident of AI applications, and now more of the companies trying to develop tools and mechanisms in order to avoid such cases. You can see two different, let's say, reports that have been published by Gartner, just to see the importance of it. The first one says that, okay, you can see that, okay, almost 22% of the enterprises and applications, they're shifting towards that direction. So try to address those kind of risk and mitigation around it. And also this privacy and, let's say, the topic of ethical AI is now in every application that is going to be developed. So let's understand what is bias and strategies to mitigate the bias. So the definition of the bias is a standard definition. It's not something specific. It's a systematical error of an AI outcome. So this is what it is. There are different sources of bias based on the source that you are looking for, but most of them are categorized in those, let's say, three categories. So there is a data bias, so the bias based on the data set, and this can be either unpredictable, let's say, data set, or if we can make any mistake on categorization of the different data set to be included in your training sets. There is algorithmic bias, where the bias is introduced to the model itself, and this is not always wrong. There are cases where we want bias, but when we're talking about drug applications, usually the bias is linked to erroneous output. And also there is a human bias, where either accidentally or we are labeling different data sets with the wrong way, or we are influencing the system without, let's say, input, and this producing increases the bias of the outcome of the application. Developing bias, the final one, is when we are deploying an application that we have tested on specific, let's say, conditions, and we are deploying it in a different environment, where the environment is interacting with the system and creates unexpected output. The impact of the bias is we have outcomes that are not, let's say, comply to any ethical regulation, or at least are, let's say, discriminating specific aspects of the output. There are different ways how we can mitigate the bias. I can mention a few of them. So we can have diversity on the data set. So we can have as diverse data sets as possible in order to try to capture all the different aspects of the training sets. We can have audits regularly through the SDLC process, but also after going live. So this is important. Try to identify the bias, try to capture it, to measure it, and try to resolve it. Monitoring is another aspect that it is important. When we are deploying applications and we maintain those applications in production environments, it is important to collect feedback, to collect what is happening, the responses, try to see and try to judge if the output is according to your standards or not. And this is a process, a continuous process that is happening. Also, we need, let's say, to adjust the design in a different, let's say, concept in order to try to have as automated process as possible in order to capture and measure the bias. Ethical guidance are very important for the compliance purpose of the developed application. So there are different guidelines based on the region that we are operating, especially for us is the EU Act. So it is important to have this understandable by the team, the development team, but also the stakeholders in order to know what to expect. We need to train people on ethical topics. So it is different to, let's say, to talk and face ethical issues, and it's different be expecting that, okay, this can happen, and what needs to be avoided in advance, and how we can mitigate it after it happens. Also, the stakeholders and the users of the application that we develop, it is important to know that, okay, this is an AI, it's not a human, so we need somehow to train the people what to expect and how we can treat the responses of such a system. So this was for bias. For transparency and reliability, there are different ways to address it. I mentioned 8 steps, so it is a continuous process that is happening in order to try to address the transparency and the reliability of the system. So starting with a consistent performance. So we need somehow to be able to avoid deviation on the performance of the system. So we need to monitor, let's say, if we're talking about the rack system, it is important to have a process to always judge and always, let's say, capture the performance of the system, try to be as consistent as possible. There is a robust system design, so it's a different way of designing application 5 years ago, or let's say a few years ago, from what it is now out there available for the developers to follow. So there are different techniques, either automated or several techniques considering user feedback, or any others that we can spoke later in the presentation, how we can design a system in a way that is going to be the less exposed to ethical, let's say, incidents. We discussed about continuous monitoring and update. So don't consider that something that you develop today after 1 or 2 years is going to remain as it is. The documentation, the input is going to change. The outputs are going to be adjusted according to the standards that we are continuing evolving. There is also a case of the human to be in the loop. So don't think that, okay, this is a totally automated system. Always try to collect the feedback, include the feedback in the system, try to have this interaction with the users that are using the system. This is very important. We need also to be ready and prepared for the risk management and compliance. So we need to know exactly what is the process, how we can define the risk management before and after, let's say, how we can, let's say, mitigate those kind of incidents. We need to have regular audits and stakeholder engagement, so we need somehow to have a process to audit both of the data sets per se, because the systems are going to, the system is going to always include new documentation, new sources, so it is important to audit frequently what is happening and what are the documentation, the condition of the documentation and how this is happening, but also to audit the system overall. We need to have techniques to explain to the users of the system how the outcome is coming from. So it is important to have clarity and give the option to the user to verify themselves the output. So this is very important, especially on RAG systems. So when you have an answer, there are different techniques with citation, references, having exposed the knowledge of, let's say, that it has been used in order for the system to reply. So all those techniques are very critical just to increase the confidence of the user for the system and to have a clear documentation. So both the technical teams, but also the testing teams and the users that are going to use the system needs to have access to the clear documentation, both from the model perspective, but also from the process perspective on complex systems that we are designing and we are developing in the specific area. So I'm going through a very specific, let's say, use case just to give you the experience that we have faced developing such a system. We are talking about a knowledge management system that we have developed initially to be able to collect and use it as a hub, connecting all the information that we have in the organization, helping the user to retrieve this information and find answers to different, let's say, queries. Soon we realized that, okay, there are different sources, different use cases. We need to proceed in more an agentic AI approach because one system cannot be able to handle all those kind of cases. So we start building a platform that is managing all the knowledge of the organization. And when I'm talking about knowledge, I'm not talking about documents only. I'm talking also about operational data. I'm talking about video, training materials. So anything that it is stored and it is available to the people of the company, it is coming through the system that we're going to see. So the objectives of the system was to develop an application that is going to be able to retrieve information, collect information, and try to be domain specific, because there are different documentation per different domains. So we have specific agents and specific capabilities per domain. We want to give this information back to the user in the different channels. So the users, some users prefer to interact with a chatbot, Some users prefer to interact with a search engine. Some users want to, let's say, to browse a conversational experience, but also in the middle of the experience, they want to search, they want to see the documentation, and they want to navigate through the source of the system. So all those kind of things are available through the system that we design. This system has different layers, so the system is connected to any documentation that we store as a source in the organization, as I told you, operational system, IoT devices, ERPs, SharePoint locations, websites, training materials, so everything it is captured to the system. There is 4 layers that we are currently using. So this is the source. We have the integration layer, so we have different ways to integrate the data to our knowledge of the system. So initially we start with regular scans. Now we're proceeding with streaming. So we try to be as real as possible processing the data. We have an ecosystem of, let's say, trying to create the embeddings in different, let's say, in different databases, try to tag the information based on several metadata, try to help the different agents to come with those, let's say, kind of knowledge exposure. And we have a different set of models that we are utilizing for that purpose. So usually, when we're deploying a different domain on the system, we have a phase approach. So we test what is happening. We test which is the model that performs the best. We have a semi-automated way, I can say, that, okay, this test process is happening in order to see which is the model and under which, let's say, configuration properties the system performs the better. And this is happening. We're exposing this information to different, we call them copilot, it is agents. So the different agents can be orchestrated together in order to collect the information based on the knowledge, because some questions are not referring to one specific knowledge domain. So in order to be able to address that one, we have different agents that communicate each other and have access to different knowledge. One thing that we have realized is about the privacy of the data. So in a corporation, the data are not available to everybody. There are specific knowledge available to a specific group of people, while there are restricted documentation that are also available to the other, let's say, to another, let's say, target group of people. So we have implemented a feature called security trimming. So what is happening is during the parsing of the source of the information based on the metadata of the different documentation, no matter if it is documents or unstructured data or structured data based on operational system, we capture who has access to the data, and this information, it is automatically filtered based on the user that is accessing the system. So in that perspective, we try to, let's say, to narrow down as possible the possibility of exposing something to the wrong audience. We have different services to orchestrate the whole solution. So we have API management that we try to capture the performance of the system. This is a very demanding process overall. So a lot of people are using it for different, let's say, domains. So it is important for us to manage the monitoring aspect of the system, also from the application perspective, but also from the model performance. So we're capturing what is happening. We are collecting the feedback of the user. We are giving the opportunity, this feedback, to be propagated back as a knowledge. We have implement the strategy of having the human in the loop. So it is important to have data owners on every system that it is related to that capability. So when we inject knowledge to the system, we identify the owner of the knowledge or the group of people that own that knowledge in order to be able to reply back to the, let's say, to the user comments, to the feedback from the users, or to help them create new knowledge, because the system is targeting to 2 different personas. One persona is the user that it is accessing the system, but also through that process, we saw that there's a huge opportunity for us to become better on how we can document our solutions and our internal knowledge. So now we know exactly what the users are asking, if the users are happy with the replies of the system, and we use that feedback through the process again to the owners to optimize and create new content, that this content is going to solve, let's say, the questions that are not, let's say, answered in the right way. So we are, I mentioned that, okay, we are also generating content. So we don't rely only on the content that the system is scanning, but also we are creating targeted Q&As verified by the user. So when someone is asking something, we saw that sometimes just to avoid the whole process of spinning this process of LLMs and try to have this kind of, let's say, process, it is very convenient. If we find a similarity on the previous asked question, we can serve that question as a reply. And we have a different mechanism of try to tag those Q&As, verified, not verified by the owner. So we are increasing the trust of the system by giving the visibility to the end user that this response has been verified by a human. So this is a process that it shows us that, okay, we increase a lot of the trust for the system to the users. And another important aspect that we mentioned before is about collaboration. So the system is not just a system for the user to interact, it's a system that each of the user can work together and collaborate together. So by allowing the user to give feedback, by allowing the user to share that feedback, or even comment on a response, even publish a reply publish a feedback that is giving based on the question, it is very important. And also we display the user that gave the feedback, so this creates a collaboration environment and the users start chatting each other. They have, let's say, if someone feels that, okay, this something was not clear, he can connect with the people, with an employee specific or the domain owner that has provided that feedback, and they can have an extra discussion. So this is very important. So what is the challenges that we face? So now let's deep dive. Now that you have an understanding of the system that we have developed, let's see how we can manage several challenges that we face through the process. So on the model per se, we said that, okay, there are different issues that we need to challenge. One is the models always hallucinate. So it is a case that always can happen. So we said that, okay, we need to see how we can, let's say, address the issue of hallucination. We said that, okay, we need also to face the issue of data privacy and security. So we don't want to expose data to different, let's say, audiences, target groups. We need to address the bias, and in order to address the bias, as said before, we need to measure bias. We need to find a way to have a specific KPI for it in order to try to address it, because both hallucination or any of the issues, ethical or not, we need to create KPIs in order to set a standard and always improve the performance of it. And finally, we want to create a system that is going to be consistent on the responses. So what is the risks that we faced? So we thought that, okay, if we build something that it is not according to the specific principles that we set from ethical AI, but not only for that one, we're going to lose trust. We're going to lose users. So we want to deploy a system that soon is going to be set aside. And this is what we want to tackle with all those kinds of strategies. We want to have a system that follows specific regulation. We don't want to have a system that is not following a regulation for the obvious reason, but not only that one, because we believe that those regulations and compliances are there for us to use as a guidance to have appropriate output and robustness of the system. And we want to develop something that soon is going to, let's say, to start building on it in order to become it as a platform. So to serve different agents and different capabilities, not only for the internal, let's say, employees, but also soon for the external customers that we are facing. So this knowledge, through the different channels that we have, soon is going to be exposed to the outside, let's say, customers from Hellenic. What is the solution that we thought that, okay, we may, let's say, introduce in order to mitigate both the risk, but also addressing the challenges. We said that we need to have a way to automatically monitoring the whole, let's say, process, also from the model perspective, but also from the responses of the system while we're developing, or also while we are deploying we have, let's say, live the system. So we said that, okay, we need to have test-driven system design decisions. So we need to have the data in order to have those kind of things, and not, let's say, based on different, let's say, thoughts or whatever. So we want to have a continuous monitor, let's say, process for it. And we want to have compliance on the documentation. So we said that, okay, let's create the documentation that is needed, both from the testing perspective, but also from the evaluation perspective. And for that reason, we have developed a model that is testing the system offline, but also online during the user transaction. So let's go to that one. So initially, the process have four steps. So we try to manage the data. So we try to prepare the data in a way that we're scoring the data, how ready the data are to be parsed by an AI model. So we try to come back with a feedback to the domain owners if the documentation is appropriate for the system or not, and we score it in order to have also feedback to the domain owners how we can evolve their documentation. We have create the process of auditing. So while we are progressing with onboarding knowledge, we are progressing with several audits, both from the new one, but also the existing documentation, because this is a continuous process. The documentation is not static. The documentation is changing per day, per hour. Everybody can change it. So we need to have a process how we can either automatically or through a trigger event, we can trigger audits in order to start see what is happening. And also very important is to define the accountability. So we need also to raise the concern of the data owners that they are responsible for their documentation, no matter if this documentation is an operational, a structured, or unstructured, let's say, a document. We had the process of reviewing. So we have implemented a model that it is scanning the whole documentation and based on the feedback and the analytics of the system creates a report based on different domains. So, and those domains are domains based on a topic. So we have legal, we have employee experience, different domains, but also we have different domains that we identify during the process based on the feedback and the interaction of the user. So if the users are asking a specific knowledge, we try to group that knowledge together and create a virtual domain, and we try to improve the performance of the system based on that domain. We are using the feedback not only to have the KPIs if the system is performing well or not. We are using the feedback also to help the users to improve the documentation by either going and manually update the documentation or include new resources that has been forgotten, but also to create Q&As that can be served, as I said before, as recommended questions and answers during the interaction of the user. This approach really increase the confidence of the user, because now they see that someone has approved that one and it's not a generic knowledge that has been used in order for a given output. During the implementation, we create a judge actually to try to mitigate and to measure the bias. So there are different ways how we can identify bias, hallucination, or try to have these analytics, both offline by the audits, but also during the process. So when the user is asking something and there is an interaction to the system, we always try to score automatically and through a regular audit the responses if they're following a specific threshold. And if it is above a specific threshold, we trigger a different mechanism, try to avoid exposing wrong information to the user, no matter if it is ethical or even non-ethical, which is hallucination in general. So this has been achieved by a module that we have introduced to the system, try to address that one. And we call it Judge, and it has different features, either, let's say, through an LLM, or there are different techniques trying to have this classification and try to see if a specific answer is following specific guidelines that we have already said, both from the policy that we have introduced, also from the knowledge that we have gained through the system. We enrich the documentation always, and we are having this collaboration environment. So human is important to be in the loop. We cannot avoid any of an ethical case if human is not part of the loop. So we need to somehow to educate the people about the responses of the system, but also to have the human in the loop, and especially the domain owners part of the system. This is very critical. Also, you have to utilize different models, because you can see that during the process, models are performing totally different based on the knowledge that they have, and also by the techniques that they're using. And also we proceed not always using the out-of-the-box models, but we see that training and fine-tuning specific models on specific domains it's more appropriate. And it is important to try to identify per domain through the audit or the onboarding of the domain to the system, which is the model that is more appropriate for each of the use case. So the continuous monitoring is important, the evaluation, also the insights. What are the people that are using, asking for? What is the domain that the people are more interested in? So all those kind of questions, it is important for us to try to focus the specific effort on the specific domain or the specific agent that it is in this multi-agent, let's say, system. Because at the end, it is impossible to focus on everything. You need somehow to have the insights, to have the data-driven decisions about where should we put your focus in order to start, let's say, becoming better on a specific domain or specific case or whatever. So the evaluation model and some details about it. So you can see on the right is, let's say, the users that are accessing the system. So they can access the system through different channels. Few of the channels are mentioned here, but there are a lot of channels that are used as an API. So this system is injected to any system that can have an interaction with an API, but also some systems that are, let's say, available through a dedicated portal or with a Teams or in the intranet or in the search, let's say, of the intranet. Someone can start accessing the data of the system. So there is, on the right, the core system as a platform, and there are several capabilities that are offered. So there are different applications that spin off in order to implement this agentic capability. There is a search service that it is dedicating, it is dedicated for the search queries. There is the feedback service, so we are collecting feedback, we are evaluating the feedback, we are creating Q&As based on the feedback. And these Q&As, there is a process that someone goes and verify if he wants that the feedback that has been provided is valid. And if he finds that it is valid, there is a stamp that is used in order for this, let's say, feedback to, this answer to be recommended in a similar, let's say, situation. And also there are, let's say, the reporting and the insights, which is very important for both personas, both from the user perspective to see what the other users are asking, or my feedback if it is incorporated in the system, and how the people are seeing my feedback in order to start increasing my confidence that I can contribute to the system and try to create more and try to help the evolution of the system, but also from the domain owners to understand what the people are asking and also how they can change the way that we are having our documentation, both from the model to be able to capture that knowledge, but also to introduce missing parts of the documentation. So the box in the middle is the automated and not automated process that we're using in order to have this evaluation mechanism happening offline through audits and monitoring that we are performing regularly, but also real time, trying to let's say, to score the responses and try to hide or have different mechanisms or replying back to the user. So we have statistical scoring, so we are scoring the responses based on statistics. We have several models to try to do the evaluation matrix. We are using several classifications and non-classification models trying to have this as a KPI for the responses. We have combined scores, so we are using other models to detect hallucination, to detect, let's say, how, based on semantics, how the response is categorized, or at least how it is scored based on what the user is expecting, or if it is relevant to a similar questions. So if you're building a system as a platform, you're collecting this information and you have the full feasibility of the insights. So we try also to start to connect different questions and answers, categorized and linked together in a graph. So if someone is asking something, even if we cannot have the confidence to judge a response, we can find, based on similarities, if several other questions and answers are similar to that one. And we try to use all of that one as a semantic scoring in order to see if the reply is okay, or we don't feel that the reply is targeting the question. And we have also the LLM. It's a full automated process, and usually this is more real time that is happening. So every response is passing through a model, and there is a threshold that, okay, we see that several criteria is met. For example, that, okay, the topic that the reply is relevant, or there are several similar questions that are replying more or less the same, answers that are the same, and we try to build a prompt, always dynamic per domain and per use case, to have this scoring. And this is happening real time in most of the cases, the LLM part, we call it LLM as a judge, but also this is also happening and offline, and those reports are available to the domain owners to verify what is happening to the system. So let's go, first of all, just to give you an idea about an example, and then I will close just to be short. So during the process, apart from the specific, let's say, biases or whatever, we figure it out that, okay, the models are language agnostic, and this is a generic truth for LLMs in general. But we saw that if we are trying to interact with different language to the system, there is a bias based on the language of the source of the documentation. So if we are making queries in Greek documents are more are selected more compared to the other. And this was a bias because the information was not always available, or at least was the appropriate on the sources. So we start realizing that, okay, we need to somehow to measure that bias and see how we can mitigate those ones. So you can see several graphs. So what we did is, okay, we ran an experiment with not translating the source of the documentation and also translating the source of the documentation. So we left, let's say, the model to try to do the semantic analysis on the source and reply back to the language that the user is asking. And we try also to translate the user question to the language that the source, or the other way around, in order to see what is the difference between not and translating the sources. We saw a totally different scoring of the same process that we described before, the three different models that we have using in order to measure the evaluation. And we saw that in most of the cases, when we're translating the knowledge or we're translating the query, the model is performing more accurate, avoiding bias, hallucination on anything related to either ethical or non-ethical issues. So that was very, very important. We have proved it, and this is how we can, through a monitor and continuous evaluation, we are changing and shifting the system to perform the best. So summary. As I told you, there are different ways in order to either address and mitigate bias, transparency, and reliability. The important thing that I want to make is 6 points. We need to emphasize of ethics in AI. So we are not talking about a system that produces some numbers to be used on a specific use case. When we're talking about natural language processing, the outcome is as unexpected. We need somehow to measure. We need also to inform the users about it. So training the team that is developing the application, but also the users that are accessing the application is very important. We need to address the bias. We need first to measure the bias. So everything needs to be measured in order to set as a standard and try to always improve it. And you need to have the mechanism to always have that control. So either if the system is designed to manage it real time, sure, but even if it is not, try to have regular audits in order to have it. You need to have transparency. You need to train the people that this system is not a system that it is not making a mistake. It is the system can hallucinate anyhow. So this user needs to feel that always need to check and verify the response. So this is very, very important. Always to promote collaboration. Don't leave the human outside the system. And use the human both from the feedback perspective, but also for exchanging the knowledge. This is very important. Focus on reliability. The system needs to be always functional and need to be consistent. And also start building the trust by being clear, both from the documentation perspective, but also open on the KPIs of the system. So if the system is not performing well, again, needs to be communicated. Try to be as clear as possible, because this is going, at the end, is going to increase the trust of the users. So I think that's it from my side. I don't know if you have questions or I exceeded the time, but...
No,
huh?
I think we're just in time.
Okay.
So, if there are any questions, yeah, please. A few of them, so nice.
You said that you tried to translate the sources, the prompt, or the documents you have to have a better outcome. Were you translating the prompt or the documents?
We have explored both of them. So we translate sometimes the prompt in order to find the match of the documentation if we know exactly the source of the documentation. But also we tried, because we have, let's say in Hellenic, we operate in 29 countries. So we have a lot of documentation in different languages. So sometimes we're using the documentation for different purposes. So if we're talking about unstructured data, which is documents, sometimes it's very useful for us to translate the document, because those documents can be used in different other domains and use cases. So in those cases, we have, based on the preference of the user and the interaction, it is using information that it is translated to the user language. If we don't have the translation in the user language, we're doing the opposite around. We're translating the prompt, and we're doing the same exercise. In both experiments that we did, the result was more or less the same. So it is, for us, what it is convenient and fast to incorporate in the process. But no matter what, try to avoid, for the bias perspective, the model to do the translation.
Two more questions.
Hi, thank you for the wonderful presentation. I have two questions. One is, like, you did not talk about what kind of evaluation tool have you been leveraging for this? The other important aspect, because I've been also working in the evaluation landscape, is the usage of guardrails. I feel like that is something that you could have been super benefited from. So any reasons why did you not use guardrails, and what evaluation tool have you been using?
So, I didn't mention few, but this is not means that we don't use them. So probably I try to be specific. We use different technologies for evaluation. So on different stages, as you saw, there are, let's say, semantic evaluation and non-semantic evaluation. On the semantic evaluation, you're using other LLMs as judges in order to help us going through the process. We are using also other models from, let's say, from the traditional, let's say, knowledge, natural language processing, try to have a score we used BART or several other, let's say, use cases to try to do it. And also we used, let's say, a mechanism that we developed, and we see that it is very helpful for us, is that we try to tag specific semantics or concepts during the documentation. So based on those tags, we have a classification model trying to give us the scores that we want, both from the understanding so some KPIs are how clear the response is, how relevant the response is to the initial questions. Or if there are several questions that are recommended together, we try to find the correlation of the answer of the given question to the other recommended questions. And based on that, we increase the trust, and we have a specific scoring that we are capturing in order to have that process. So this is few of the things that we are using for the evaluation.
But no particular tool per se?
No particular tool.
Okay. And what about the guardrails? They're not, like you did not try these, or?
What do you mean guideline?
The guardrails, as in, so you spoke about hallucination being a big problem, and you've exercised many different techniques about that. But I do not see that like introducing prompt-based guardrails to make sure that the response doesn't hallucinate and all.
Okay. So the prompt that the system is using is totally different based on domains. And the prompt is not only different per domain, it's different per use case. Because one system, and especially if it is implemented in an agentic, let's say, point of view, they have different agents that are responsible for the domain. So there is one part of the prompt that is static, and we are using and evaluating through a process of the prompt flow that we're using to always scoring the prompts. But also the user, what the user is asking, we try to capture and see on the evaluation, both the response, but also the prompt is part of evaluation. So if the prompt is not following the specific guidelines or guardrails, we say that, okay, this prompt needs to be avoided, or we come with a response that, okay, can you express the question in a different way? So we try to navigate the score, but also this is happening both on the real-time judge that we're using at the end and informing the user, but on the static one, so on the regular audits, we are focusing on evaluating the static part of the prompt and not the user part of the prompt.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
I think we have one more question, and we don't have time for another one.
Yeah.
Thank you for the presentation, for sharing this use case. It was quite insightful. Can you share some data regarding the time frame and the resources, meaning how long did it take to implement a solution like that, from inception to deployment? And also, I'm interested from the first POC to deployment, and also how big were the teams working on it?
Yeah. Initially, I had more, let's say, technical slide to show, but I said, okay, maybe it is too deep dive on the technical details. But the system started as an innovation idea. So we started as an innovation, exploring back then the trend for LLMs, and we built the RAG system. Try to be very specific on a specific use case, on a specific model. And we took us more or less maximum 2 months to deploy a POC. We saw that this is very performing very well and addressed by the users, and we saw that, okay, the value that we have on both retrieving but also exposing the information easily to the users. We start then trying to build different architecture like RAG, graph RAG, in order to try to improve, because we said that, okay, moving forward to different kind of domains and knowledge, probably we need to start building this network around different concepts. We said that, okay, then we explore it from the agentic point of view. We said that, okay, let's split the information and the ownership of the domains to different agents, try to have more specific, trying not to hallucinate or lost in the huge documentation space that we have. For that one, until, let's say, for example, introducing this multi-domain capability, it took us 6 months, but again, on the POC or MVP case. The whole project, now it is live, it is available to the whole organization, and approximately it took, let's say, a year with a dedicated team trying to utilize different techniques and different processes, both from the data science perspective, but also from the engineering perspective. Because challenges was on both cases, both from LLMs, but also from the engineering point of view, because the more users that are using the system needs to be robust, needs to be reliable. We need to have this transparency, and this transparency is not always based on, we cannot serve documents, we need also to give the proof of the operational data, so displaying logs, displaying tables. So those kind of things are okay, but in general, it took us a year with a dedicated team to deploy.
And how was the size of the team? What was the size of the team? Like 10 people or 5 people? Like just
initially, the
idea.
size of the team, yes, was 6 people, and now we are growing a lot.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Great.